Let's hear it for La Murga. Can you guys hear me? Good evening, and I am so pleased to welcome you to Mayor Adler's last State of the City address. My name is Leslie Varghese. I have had the honor of serving as Chief of Staff to the most progressive mayor in the state of Texas and the hardest working mayor in America for the last 7.5 years. I see a lot of our present and former Team Adler staff here, and on behalf of these remarkable human beings and the mayor himself, we're so glad to have you here tonight. You know, people sometimes ask me how I survived for 7.5 years, the hardest working in America part, and I would say there's always been something familiar about him. You know, we're both trained as lawyers. We actually clerked at the same law firm, even under the same partner. But also, even though Mayor Adler is Jewish, he operates on Indian Standard Time. He is always 15 minutes late. In fact, I was so sure he'd be 15 minutes late right now. We have prepared a 15-minute video for you as a thank you to him for his tenure. You know, everyone in this room knows how much Steve Adler loves Austin. And Mayor, we love you back. Cue the video. Austin is like no place on earth. It's this magical place where creative, bright, caring people will lead with their values. Everything that we looked at in the office had a lens of, is this inclusive? Will it bring Austinites together?
We've been blessed that Austin's always been a welcoming city. Over the last 8 years, Austin has become the third largest per capita city of LGBT community. It just goes to show you that we're doing what's right by the LGBT community.
Previous mayors helped some, but not to the extent that Mayor Adler did. And what Mayor Adler did is brought all the community together and bring all of us to the table and start to work together to accomplish the city goal that the city could be.
The mayor needs to be the chief defender of our values, the chief defender of our city from the cynical and relentless attacks by other levels of government, by the most, again, cynical politics that seek to tear down cities.
This council and this mayor have been unapologetic about making sure that we're prioritizing mental health over incarceration, that we're focused on housing.
While our state has banned access to abortion, we're going to continue to do everything we can to overturn that ban. And in the meantime, for vital cancer screenings, birth control, HIV tests, trusted sexual and reproductive health care is more essential than ever. And thanks to our partnership with Mayor Adler and the Austin City Council, we're here for the next generation of Austinites.
I've really admired that about his leadership, is that it's been centered around how do we make Austin a place for everyone, people who have historically built and made the city what it is, and people who are coming into the city to take us into our future.
Over the last 8 years in the city of Austin, we have been able to truly work on affordability in our community. And this has taken a lot of different ways in which we've tackled it, from housing dispersion to ensuring that we have housing in every part of our community, to building affordable opportunities for everyone within Austin. So really making sure those from folks experiencing unsheltered homelessness to those who are first-time home buyers have the ability to go out and access affordable opportunities.
There have been painful moments in the last 8 years where we have been divided as a community. But the efforts of the mayor have brought us together, and we now have a plan. We have a structure that looks at all of our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness, youth, the elderly, individuals experiencing chronic homelessness, domestic violence and how that factors into homelessness, and provides the framework for us developing not just housing capacity, but the capacity to support and enable folks to be successful in their housing.
The mayor gathered people like me from the real estate community, people from the affordable housing community. We were put into his conference room for over a period of 6 months with the idea of coming up with a private equity solution to this moderate income affordable problem that we have here in Austin. Out of that effort grew the Austin Housing Conservancy Fund. Again, the fund launched in 2018. We bought our first properties at that point, and now have really kicked up our growth. In the past year, we've increased the size of the fund by 150%.
Over the last 8 years, our community has funded in the form of affordable housing bonds and leveraged that for other sources of funding, and created over 800 permanent supportive housing units, and over 4,000 affordable housing units. Under the leadership of Mayor Adler, we're looking to a bond proposition for $350 million, which will produce, we hope, again, leveraged with other sources of funding, thousands more affordable housing units, income-restricted units.
When I imagine the Austin of the future, and I think about the impact that the mayor and the city council currently are making, and how we would measure success, we would want to see an Austin that is inclusive, an Austin that has frequent, reliable public transportation, that has affordable housing, and an Austin that really values and respects the lives of every single one of our residents. And that means having strong tenant protections, having strong worker protections, to make sure that the Austinites who have been here for generations are able to remain and thrive, and that we are capable of welcoming new Austinites as well as our city continues to grow.
We've worked on plans to make energy efficiency programs more readily available to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford them.
Previously, the conversation in Austin was the neighborhood versus the developer. Now it's the worker and the social justice activist and the people that care about the future of growth in general from a climate perspective. Broadening that conversation has made the conversation more difficult, but also created a lot more possibilities than there were in the past.
One thing I truly appreciate about Mayor Adler's leadership and involvement on almost a daily basis was the 2018 bond election, where the voters approved more than $70 million to preserve more water, more land, more wildlife. And Mayor Adler was a big help in educating the voters about the importance of that. We preserve in perpetuity. It will be there for the citizens to enjoy for the benefits of open space, the clean water, the clean air, the dark skies forever.
The parks and trails that have been created in the last 8 years are forever parks and trails. My children and their children can have that open space, and that is something that distinguishes Austin from, I think, many, many places.
The more cities like Austin and our peers across the state make investments in renewable energies that have been championed by our city leaders, including the mayor, we really get to help set the tone for the investments and the level of new, exciting breakthroughs in renewable energy that we make as a state.
How would I describe Project Connect? I think a unifying tool that would really, again, usher a new era of mobility for our city. It's not just about cars, but it's about walkability and about active mobility.
We have made significant progress enhancing safety and mobility of our transportation infrastructure. With the implementation of these projects, we'll have significant impact on safety and mobility, but we'll also help connect communities, provide multimodal transportation solutions, and help address our affordability issues.
The Austinites of tomorrow and their children will look back at the choices made as to whether or not Austin wanted to remain a car-centric, congested city that was continually sprawling outward. Austinites have made a choice to go a different way, to move into a 21st century city where we get around without cars, where we have trains and buses, where we have e-bikes riding and on-street protected bicycle facilities, where you can get anywhere in the city in just 15 or 20 minutes without having to get in a car.
One of the things that's been important for me as a faith leader in our city is that there are a number of people that I speak for and who trust me to be able to give their input to those in leadership. And so Mayor Adler has made it a great opportunity for me to be able to share what's happening, not just with our congregation, but with the people of East Austin and various other communities that I'm able to associate with. And so I think it's a good thing that he's done as a role model for the rest of the leaders in the city.
I think the city will change for the future for the better because of the work of Mayor Adler. And one of the things that I want to point to is the emphasis on systemic racism and the task force that he convened to bring together advocates, business community, community leaders to have a real discussion about what it means to break down systems and structures that have historically and intentionally discriminated against people, particularly Black people.
Working with Mayor Adler and his team, we've been able to do some really good things. We've been able to have policies that ban chokeholds, which is something that we were able to do that before federal administration was. We were able to decriminalize marijuana here in the city of Austin, which was also before a lot of other places were doing it.
I think we're in a unique position to have a real strong impact on people's thinking and how they prioritize racial equity in their work, whether it be the business, whether it be education, whether it be government, that we're comfortable and courageous enough to have the conversation without feeling embarrassed, without having to question ourselves or second guess or feel defensive.
I've really admired that about his leadership, is that it's been centered around how do we make Austin a place for everyone, people who have historically built and made the city what it is, and people who are coming into the city to take us into our future.
The very first canary in the coal mine was, of course, South by Southwest. I remember walking to the office, and on lots of days you walk in and you have a really tough decision to make. And that day we had one of the toughest decisions I think we would ever have to make, which was to close a festival that's synonymous with the city, to close a festival that many people depended on for their income. For lots of small businesses, this was the event. Some of them waited for all year to make money on their inventory, and to close it was no small question. I remember the meetings talking about the messaging opportunities, trying to understand what we could about what protections we had available. And at that time, there was limited PPE. There wasn't a way to reliably and responsibly contact trace. And in that moment, it was clear that there was only one thing to do, and it was a really, really hard thing to do.
What we saw over the last 2 years is government, nonprofits, community groups coming together in ways that haven't always been possible in the past, and incredible working together and synergy to achieve much better outcomes for our population here in Austin Travis County. If the rest of the state of Texas had the same COVID-19 death rate as in Austin Travis County, over 50% of the Texans who died of COVID-19 would still be alive today.
If we had had South by Southwest that year, we would have had a tragedy on our hands that we avoided. It did mean that we had 2 years of a devastated music economy with empty venues, festivals that didn't happen. We worked on a $12 million bond that the citizens passed. We got an annual stream of funding for the music department for the first time.
There's been over $17 million in disaster relief funding. There's been a live music fund, cultural land trust, and a lot of zoning changes that really shows in front and center that Austin is the live music capital of the world and a leader in the space for music cities in this country. I'm glad that we finally have a city partnership in place where people not only listen, but can implement and design programs that will help us evolve and continue 10, 20, 30 years from now, a music story in Austin that's successful, competitive, even if we have a lot of hard work between now and then.
In Austin, Texas, in this area, we have the ability to set the example that every young person has the opportunity, and this is workforce development, but I think it's even bigger than that. It's this ideal that you can make a living and a life doing what you love to do. The key thing we've got to keep moving forward on is the idea that we got to provide a way for every young person in Austin, if they want to stay here, to make it.
city funding per young child in our communities increased by more than $84. We have significantly advanced the goals of the Austin-Travis County Success by 6 strategic plan, increasing access to high-quality early care and education programs for all of our community's young children, and improving coordination to services.
I know that Mayor Adler's term is up, and I'm really going to miss him in that leadership role. I appreciate him. I thank him for his tenure as mayor, for the support that he's given to not just Mount Zion, the faith community, but also to me as a person.
Mayor Adler, thank you so much for your service to the city. Thank you for giving your time, your energy, your knowledge, and so much to serving the residents of Austin.
Steve, when you're done with this, you catch up on your rest, text me, let's go grab a drink and see some great music.
Mayor Steve, deeply appreciate all the work and serious consideration you've given to our music community.
Thank you for your service to the city. Thank you for your leadership.
Mayor Adler, we are so grateful that we've been able to stand with you through these last 8 years. We've faced incredible challenges together, and you and the Austin City Council have had our back.
Mayor, it's been a great pleasure getting to work alongside you over the last 2 years, and more importantly, getting to know you over the past 8 years. Thank you for everything you've done for our community. We in the city of Austin appreciate all your hard work, and we wish you all the best for the future.
And now, without further ado, Mayor Steve Adler.
Thank you. Thank you. So good evening. See if we can get the sound right. You know, it is such an honor and a privilege to stand before you as your mayor. And by now you probably know me well enough to know that I never use one word when I can use 10. But I do have one really short and simple message for you today. And it's thank you. Thank you to the 10-1 city councils, my partners, my colleagues, my friends these last 8 years. My mayor pro tem, my old mayor pro tem, my old mayor pro tem, and the council. I also understand that some of my old colleagues are with us here today. County Attorney Garza is here, and Councilmember Kassar, Councilmember Gallo, I think, are all with us today. Thank you. We also have other public officials that I want to thank for being here. State Representative Saya Israel, I understand, is with us today. County Judge Andy Brown. Our tax assessor, collector, and our voter registrar, Bruce Elfont, I think is with us. You know, government has really worked together in ways over the last 8 years that, to my experience, have been unprecedented. I want to really thank the city employees and the city staff and its leadership. Your resourcefulness, your dedication have impressed me since the moment I began my service. You do such a gift to the city. Manager Cronk, congratulations on the expanded family, and I want you to know how much it means to me that you would hurry back home to be here today. Thank you to the many community advocates and organizations whose expertise and energy made our ideas sharper, our policies more just. Some of you are in the room here tonight. I want to thank my staff at City Hall over the last 8 years, without whom I would just be another guy with a lot of crazy ideas. I will miss all of you, and I really mean that. Thank you to my family, especially my wife, Diane. You know, she's been with me every step of the way, and she is my partner in this job, as with all things that we do in ways that few understand. And thank you to the people of Austin, to everybody who came to a town hall meeting or to make their voices heard, to everyone who voted, to everyone who loves the city enough to give something of themselves to make it better. Thank you. You know, Austin holds itself to pretty high standards. And I didn't recognize another one of my colleagues, another Mayor Pro Tem Cheryl Cole, and I want to make sure I do that before I forget who's also with us. Thank you, Representative. But anyhow, Austin holds itself to pretty high standards, and actually we're not really comfortable celebrating our successes while we still know that there are Austinites that are struggling. But tonight, we're going to heed the advice of one of our own, the great Molly Ivins, who reminded us to fight for freedom, fight for justice, but have fun doing it, to rejoice, she said. And so we should, because the state of our city is one that we should be proud of. In 2015, when the new 10-1 council and I were first elected, there were some city employees and contractors working for the city that were making as little as $7.25 an hour. There was no mass public transit in sight. Affordable housing investment was modest. And we were building to a 4-year backlog in untested DNA rape kits with far too many survivors waiting for delayed justice. We had unsheltered neighbors living perilously in our creeks and in our storm drains. We had no comprehensive plan to address workforce opportunities in our region. And meaningful and constructive police reform was an untouchable issue. A rising national extremist politics was increasingly threatening our local values. Now, it is true that much remains to realize the work that we have begun over the last 8 years. But for tonight, we're going to pause and celebrate where we are and what we have achieved and how we got here and where we're going to go. Because the state of our city, as measured against almost every metric used to compare cities, is exceptionally strong. Austin is among the top big cities to live in the country. It remains one of the safest in the country. We are one of the healthiest. We rank number 1 in wage growth. We are number 2 in job growth. Austin has one of the lowest unemployment rates among large cities in the country. The city budget we just passed is not only balanced, but it projects a surplus budget for the next 4 years. We are the best big city for job seekers. It is the best place for entrepreneurs to launch new startups. And since it's not all business all the time, we are in the top 10 of the most fun cities to live in, and we are the most fun city to live in Texas. And of course, we are still the best city in the country for live music, and we are the reigning live music capital of the world. This is our city as it stands today. The state of our city is worth celebrating. You know, one of my favorite memories in my first years in office was going to Gus Garcia Young Men's Leadership Academy for the annual tie ceremony. Now, Mayor Garcia was Austin's first Latino mayor. He was a great Austinite. He was my mentor, and he was a champion of equity, especially in education. The school that bears his name continues his tradition of leadership. Every year, the older 8th graders help the first-year middle schoolers tie what, for some of them, is the first tie they have ever owned. It's a symbol of the students' bond with each other. Now, I was supposed to help the younger students tie their ties, but I discovered pretty quickly that I was unnecessary. The 8th graders, they had it covered. In fact, the new 6th graders proudly helped me tie my tie, this very gold tie. I have 2 grandchildren, and there are 2 more on the way. A greater source of pride and joy than I could ever imagine, greater even than being mayor of the city that I love. The young students at Gus Garcia, like mine, like all our children, like all our grandchildren, will inherit Austin years from now. And they will inherit the decisions that we make and the culture and expectations that we set. And we have made hard choices these last 8 years. Choices that have disrupted our lives. They have disrupted the status quo. They have made tempers flare, and occasionally they have set us against each other. We did that, not because we seek conflict. It's easier, and it is less disruptive to only try for incremental change, sometimes to settle for half measures, or even to kick a problem down the road entirely. Every city in America has examples of this, of hard choices deferred and deferred again until the hard choices become impossible ones. I am so proud and grateful that on one difficult problem after another, the buck has stopped with us. The 10-1 Council has stood resolute and taken action, supported by the community, including on some of the most difficult challenges our city faces: mobility, social equity and justice, housing and homelessness. We have pursued these priorities despite the disruption and the political havoc that follows, even while we were facing other decisions, great and small and hard and easy, that will shape Austin for generations, even while managing and overcoming an unprecedented succession of unique disasters and hardships presented these past 8 years. There is no statistic or metric, however stellar, that can capture the story of these past 8 years. It is a story of big plans and hard decisions that make them possible. In 2014, that election cycle, when the 10-1 Council and I were first running for office, the dominant issue was mobility. And today, 8 years later, we live in Austin's golden age of mobility. Our city is finally moving forward with a comprehensive public mass transit system, Project Connect, a very long project, a long-term project. It's already underway. Neighborhood circulators in operation, the Pleasant Valley and Expo Center, and the bus rapid transit lines at McAllis Station are already under construction. The blue and orange light rail lines are in active planning. $100 million in anti-displacement funding, a third of the 10-12-year total, has already been raised and turned over to the city, which has programmed already $20 million of those funding, programmed to buy up land near transit centers and corridors, for future affordable housing. We have a $4 billion project to double the size of Austin Bergstrom Airport. It's underway with the first $400 million already being spent as we speak. We've begun work to transform I-35, a $6 to $9 billion project that includes sinking and capping the main lanes. Today, we have over 400 miles of newly built or repaired sidewalks and safe routes to schools. Our bicycle network is expanding faster than any bicycle network in the country. And by 2025, we will have completed one of the largest bicycle networks in the country. Throughout the city, our major corridors are safer, they are faster, and they are being transformed for 21st century travel. You know, it was the architect, David Burnham, in his lifetime, a man who shaped American cities more than probably anybody else, who admonished us to make no little plans, for they have no magic to stir men's blood and probably will themselves not be realized. And we have in the past made big plans for mobility. In the 40 years before the 10-1 City Council was elected, there were 5 mobility projects that really stand out to me. Our airport moved. Research and Ben White Boulevard became Highways 71 and 183. And SH 130 was built to the east and MOPAC was built to the south. That's a pretty good pace for a small city. And it's fair to say that until recently, we have sometimes been guilty of acting as if Austin were still the small city that it has not been for a long time. That era has passed, and Austin has put away childish things. A great city must make bigger plans, start them faster, and do more of them. And over the past 8 years, we have done just that. Austin did those first 5 mobility projects over a 40-year period. And we're doing 5 in the last 8. In the same year that the 10-1 Council and I were first running for office, the people of Austin were voting down a public mass transit mobility project for the second time in 15 years. Now, our charge was not to persuade people of Austin that the big plan was necessary. It was to demonstrate that we properly understood the scale that was needed and to restore confidence that we could solve it at all. To present to Austin a plan that was worthy of a great city. To change our destiny by disrupting the status quo. Our guiding light has been the Austin Strategic Mobility Plan. It was adopted 3 years ago after a lot of work by a lot of people. It was the city's first multimodal, integrated, and comprehensive plan for transportation. This visionary plan is foundational to our goal of a long-time sustainable change and disruption in seeing transportation not as an exercise in moving cars, but as a commitment to moving people. We went to the people of the city and we asked them to make big plans with us, to face the hard decisions that come with them. And our city did. And over the last 8 years, the people of Austin have approved not 1, but 4 separate mobility initiatives in 2016, 2018, and 2 in 2020, raising revenues in excess of $10 billion. Now this in a city that had passed only a little bit more than $500 million cumulatively in the preceding 20 years. These initiatives combined with other city, county, states, and federal funds, have enabled us as of today to have started work on over $20 billion in projects. That is an historic investment in tying our city together. What we do now and where we have gotten today sets the trajectory for where we will be tomorrow. Our current path leads us to a city where owning a car, which is currently the second highest financial burden for Austin families, is optional. Hundreds of thousands of Austinites are going to cross the city cheaply and cleanly and quickly without a car, thanks to a world-class light rail system supported by expanded bus routes and service. The homes and businesses of people who have lived in Austin for decades are going to stand side by side with new enterprises and performance venues and public spaces as some of our most important community hubs are our light rail stations. Our global city will connect to the world through a new airport that is as large as our dreams and ambitions. We will walk and bike, we will eat, we will shop, we will come together in public spaces that stand on top of a relic of deliberate segregation above a sunken and capped I-35. Austin will be the most walkable city in Texas, with over 4,000 miles of sidewalks. Our bicycle network will be one of the largest in the country and on par with New York City. Because of the hard decisions that we have made, our children and grandchildren will inherit a city that is bound together with new sinews of rail and road and trail that is a clear sign of Austin's strength and unity. Because our transportation system is a visible commitment to the idea that Austin is more than just a collection of distant and disparate neighborhoods. We are more than just the sum of our parts. Mobility is Austin's commitment to being a city. Now, unity in a city is about more than the infrastructure that ties it all together. It's about shared culture, a sense of spirit, of community. Austin has had, in my nearly 5 decades living here, a powerful sense of its obligation and responsibility to social equity and to justice. In the past 8 years, we have defended, we have preserved that spirit. And to an ever-increasing degree, we have delivered that justice to those for whom it has too long been denied. Today, Austin centers equity in almost everything we do, in almost every decision that we make, to an extent that I believe is unmatched by any other city in the country. Our city has committed $300 million to mitigate displacement, to promote affordability as a specific line item in Project Connect, and that is a scale unheard of in a public mass transit project. We have doubled the city's investment in public health. We have committed to paid sick leave. Austin guarantees fair chance hiring to help formerly incarcerated people restart their lives. We're piloting guaranteed income to find a more efficient, just, and cost-effective way to help keep families in their homes. Our city prosecutes neither truancy nor the personal use of marijuana, both of which have been used historically to disproportionately incarcerate and bring communities of color into the justice system. We have helped cut the number of people held in the Travis County Jail by 40%. We have done as much or more than any city in the country to reimagine the concept of public safety, not just to talk about it, and to change the culture of our police force. We have enacted new ways of training police cadets, including community engagement and anti-racism training. We have changed the rules guiding when and where and how police use force. We have increased funding and training for mental health-related 911 calls. 8 years ago, about 30% of our general fund budget was devoted to building our city, with spending on social services and public health and parks and our quality of life. Today, it is almost 40%, and it's growing. And we have done this while still just passing the largest police department budget in the history of the city. Our city leads among cities that honor and support the rights of our LGBTQIA+ residents. And Austin is, to the best of our ability, it will continue to be a place that is safe for transgender children. In their home, Austinites will not face investigation and prosecution if they choose to exercise their long-held right to an abortion. These measures are emblematic of our city's belief in the dignity and worth of every Austinite. But belief is only as good as the action that backs it up. When the 10-1 Council took its seats on the dais, our city lacked the kind of infrastructure to ensure the equity and the justice, and that they were at the heart of everything that our government does. In our office, this work truly began with the spirit of East Austin community conversation. This was an exploration of equity that empowered hundreds of East Austin residents to tell us in their own words what their dreams and ideas were. We asked all of Austin then to turn and face eastward and to listen. Few remember that it was then that the term Eastern Crescent actually entered Austin's popular lexicon, helping to bring additional focus to a long-neglected part of our city. Now, we experienced progress, both here at City Hall and our community, coming out of the Mayor's Task Force on Institutional Racism and Systemic Inequities, working with partners and advocates to ensure that city decisions confront and change rather than ignore and perpetuate the inequities of the past. That task force made about 270 recommendations to improve racial equity in Austin, more than half of which have already been implemented. Thousands of Austinites have attended 2-day race training, equity and race training sessions because of the expectation created by the task force and Leadership Austin's leadership. These were not simple decisions or easy conversations. There were people who refused to participate in the task force simply because of the use of the word racism in its name. Now, it can be very hard to accept the extent to which institutional racism worms its way into so many facets, not just of our country or of our city, but our neighborhood and our lives. This is especially true around policing, where the conversation turns to how people feel safe, when and where they feel safe, and who gets to feel safe. Communities across the country have torn themselves over this issue. No wonder so many cities avoid this conversation and the undeniable decisions that will follow entering that conversation. See, Being an equitable city is not something you achieve. It is something that you decide every day. That is why we founded the Equity Office in the city of Austin. It's a permanent team to ensure that equity is integrated into every decision that we make in our city government. It is why we started the LGBTQ Quality of Life Commission, the Civil Rights Office, the Office of Police Oversight, and why we began the Reimagining Public Safety Project. The progress we have made in better realizing true public safety is a credit to this city, to the activists who stood their ground, and to the police leadership and officers who buy into the vision of the APD that works in partnership with the people of our city, where officers see themselves as guardians, not warriors, whose presence reassures everyone in the city that they are safe. I cannot claim that Austin today has overcome the often iniquitous legacy of our past. That obviously is the work of generations. But I believe we can say with honesty that when America reached yet another critical moment in its long reckoning with our original sin of white supremacy, that Austin was not found wanting. That even though we knew that opponents of this reckoning, some with pretty big megaphones, would seize on our efforts and cynically mischaracterize them for their own political ends, we nonetheless faced the challenge for no reason other than it was necessary, it was right, and it was long overdue. Okay, so Austin often has been at odds with the leaders of our state and sometime with the president of our country. But these are not fights that we have sought. No one with a city to build would choose to spend focus and spirit on hard, exhausting, and needless political battles. But as elected leaders of this great city, we are not free to turn away from those fights either, because to do so would yield the field. We are not free to turn away from those fights, because it would betray the character of the good and decent people who entrusted us with these offices. When Donald Trump ordered raids to round up undocumented immigrants and expected cities to comply, we resisted instead. We fought lawsuits. I went to Washington and argued directly with the Attorney General in his office about the administration's overreach. We stood with our friends in the Mexican consulate to provide support and assistance to the people the former president wanted to persecute. There are not many cities like Austin in the country that spend public money on legal aid to ensure that fairness and due process and the rule of law still have meaning for all residents, regardless of their immigration status. And while it is easy and tempting to pass the buck and say that these are statewide or national issues, they are not. They are local. They are about the fear on our neighbors' faces when their mosque is vandalized, or there's a knock at their door in the middle of the night and they wonder if they're going to be taken away from their families. That was the point of the ICE raids. That was the point of the Muslim travel ban. It is the point of the persecution of transgendered people. It is the point of trying to claw back the right to abortion. It is the point of everyone in a litany of outrages against good conscience and common decency. The point is to make people afraid, to make them wonder if their community is going to turn against them, to throw into doubt whether their neighbors truly recognize the full measure of their humanity. And when our state, or indeed our country, has threatened the rights and dignity of our fellow Austinites, we have made it clear, and I will take this opportunity to say it again, that this is and will forever be a just and fair city where all are welcome. For each of us, in our time, are the trustees of Austin's spirit and soul. And just as we have done, we challenge the generations who come after us to leave Austin an even more equitable, even more welcoming, more just, a more worthy place than it was when they found it. Over the last 8 years, I have had too many occasions to say, and it will still be true when our children and grandchildren inherit this city probably, no legislature and no election can change who we are. The world completely loses its mind around us, and we are still going to be Austin, Texas. Now, I said earlier that Austin holds itself to a really high standard, that we struggle to celebrate all that is great about it, when we know that our city is in some way failing to live up to our collective vision of what we should really be. That aspiration and that ambition for Austin and each other, especially when realizing our better selves requires fundamental change, makes our disagreements all the more fiery and fraught. Nowhere have we seen this more than in providing for the fundamental human need for finding a place to call home. Austin is in the middle of a housing supply and housing affordability crisis. This is an existential challenge. We are losing neighbors who can no longer afford to live here. With their loss, we lose diversity that is our biggest asset, our people, and there is much work to be done. This challenge looms large, and the city is fighting back. Austin is poised to become the first major city in America to end homelessness. Thanks to the continuing HEAL initiative, we have already moved hundreds of people without homes out of tents and off the streets. Today, a veteran who loses their home in Austin has a stable housing and services in less than 90 days. We have reduced the number of children without homes and on our streets by more than half. And perhaps most critically, we have raised well more than 80% of the $515 million that are needed to fund the community-driven Finding Home ATX 3-year plan to get 3,000 more people into shelter and off our streets. This project, the work of a remarkable and broad coalition, puts Austin on the pathway to ending homelessness for good. And by the way, you can help. FindingHomeATX.org. We have quadrupled our investment in affordable housing units in this city since just 2014. And we have invested more in the last 6 years than in the entire city's history up to that point in time. And it's still not enough. Last year, Austin built more housing than any city in the country, both in absolute numbers and numbers adjusted by population. It's not a secret that we in Austin have not always seen eye to eye on how to help our fellow residents who live without shelter. Homelessness is not a recent creation. This was an issue that was tearing up neighborhood associations and setting Austinites against each other for years. It's not a problem that lends itself to quick solutions. In fact, in the modern history of American cities, homelessness is the issue that is most often pushed out of sight and out of mind. And that was us. But there are also enough cities on the West Coast that teach if homelessness is left unaddressed, thousands of people become 10,000s of people. A difficult problem becomes unimaginable, and that was going to be us. I knew, as sure as I knew the sun would come up the next day, that if we did not act in bold and unprecedented ways, it would take us maybe 6 more years to be facing a spiraling crisis that would exceed the available will and resources that we could possibly muster to address it. So we chose instead to face the challenge and to make the hard decisions. The debate in the city over public camping brought out strong words, motivated by strong feelings. Decriminalize public camping changed the way that we thought about homelessness. It quite literally changed the way that we saw it. This was, of course, incredibly disruptive. Now, we could have and we should have done a better job in managing shared public spaces. And our failure to do so caused levels of anxiety and acrimony that could have been avoided to some degree. But the decision not to put people in jail or to hide them in the woods simply for not having a place to live was going to be fundamentally disruptive regardless. And without that disruption, we would never have come together to agree on a common solution. We would never have raised the funds we are raising now to get the job done. We would never have been, as we are today, the first American city our size that is poised to end homelessness. Now, homelessness is just one aspect of our city's larger housing challenge. We talk a lot about affordability in this city and indeed in this country, and housing is at the heart of it. We ultimately have a simple problem. We have too many buyers for too few homes where people want to live. Our current land development code does not allow us to maximize the needed housing supply in the city. In the 6 years, the 6 disruptive years of Code Next, the City Council twice voted to comprehensively change the code, but was also twice sent back to the drawing board by the courts. Being willing to make the hard and disruptive choices does not always work out, but you can't give up. Recognizing the present limitations and the need for a broader consensus, the current council has acted to trade density and supply for greater affordability. And final ordinances should be passed before the end of the year because we haven't given up. The council just before us also did not give up. When they followed a failed $80 million housing bond with a successful $65 million housing bond just 1 year later in 2013. Now, we could have learned 2 lessons from their experience. We could have concluded that the people of Austin did not want to make big investments in housing, and the future proposals would need to be more modest. Instead, we concluded that we should not set future investments with a focus on minimizing risk, but determining what the community truly needs to solve the problem, and then make the case strongly and clearly to voters and trust voters to make the right choice. In 2018, we went to the city and asked not for $65 million or $80 million, but for $250 million to invest in affordable housing. And 72% of this city supported that effort. This November, Austin voters will have the chance to approve another bond, this time for $350 million, to build even more affordable housing, to make repairs so that families can stay in their homes. We are facing an affordability and housing supply crisis, and this bond is appropriate to the scale of the challenge we face. By the way, there are 2 other bonds coming up for us in November, incidentally, also going to be on the ballot. Both of them address affordability by calling for investments in public education and the community college. Even as the city increases our supply of affordable housing, education is another key to affordability by helping people have more money to spend. So, the Austin of the future must keep and care for its people. When we confront the issues of housing and homelessness, we are deciding who we are. We're deciding who we will be. This is about the very spirit and soul of our city. If so many people want to live in Austin that it becomes impossible for anyone except the rich, we will not be Austin, Texas. If we lose our diversity and our creativity, we will no longer be an Austin that creates art in everything that we do. If the young leaders of Gus Garcia and all their generation cannot afford to live in Austin, we won't be an Austin to be proud of. Austin ensures its future if it honestly confronts its present. Now that's not easy, because the solutions need to be as big as the challenges we face. It's hard, and it requires us to confront base cultural and political differences in our city. It will be disruptive, because it pulls at the threads of our community and encourages us not only to disagree, but to distrust one another's motives. Austin must live up to this challenge, because we simply must ensure that our children and grandchildren inherit a city where everyone can not only survive but thrive. If we had only as a city confronted mobility and social equity and homelessness and housing, we could justifiably be proud of the work that we had done over the last 8 years. But we did all 3. And we did much more besides. Because a city won't simply stop to address a few problems. And there have been many others that have demanded our focus and our spirit. The present state of our city today reflects the broad agenda on which the 10-1 Council was delivered. It is making good on the promise, the potential, the hopes, and the dreams of this new governmental system. Austin continues to be an international leader on climate change mitigation. We have a 100-year water plan. 78% of our city's energy use is carbon-free, on a track to reach 100% by 2035. Electric vehicle charging stations and composting reach to every corner of this city. We've cleared a 4-year backlog of DNA rape kits. We've invested in victim services and a new domestic violence shelter. We raised the city living wage twice. Last week, to $20 an hour. Thousands of clean, middle-skill manufacturing jobs have been brought here, helping to move families out of poverty. And we have a soccer team. Thank you to Lemurda. And we have a stadium. Heck, we even started a taco war and we won. but we removed the Confederate flag from the Veterans Day Parade. We helped realize the Waterloo Greenway Park, our own Highline linear park that could be the only thing that people remember about us 100 years from now. We cut the ribbon on a new downtown library, Austin's cathedral to our intellectual and cultural traditions. We have our first ever wildfire preparedness plan. We've created and implemented the country's model for preserving workforce housing. We supported our artists and our artistic venues at historic levels. Our city's reputation for innovation is unmatched, and all this we have done without city taxes and fees going up more than 2.2% on average over the last 8 years, unless you count Project Connect, but it's still under 3% if you do. All these things we have done while still developing and executing big plans on mobility, social equity, housing, homelessness, and even more remarkable is that we did these things despite a previously unimaginable sequence of disasters and crises that have come to this city over the last 8 years. In 2015, we had a record drought and an historic flood. In 2016, we saw the rise of an extreme and hostile politics that profoundly and perhaps permanently damaged our understanding of our country and each other. In 2017, we were forced to fight in court both the governor of Texas and the president of the United States. In 2018, we faced a serial bomber and another 100-year storm. In 2019, we faced a water crisis, this time brought about by zebra mussels, of all things. In 2020, our city and our country and our world stopped for COVID. And that summer became a reckoning for America's sins. In 2021, we had Winter Storm Uri. And when that passed, we were left to face the enormous political turbulence and disruption of the big lie, a threat to our very democracy. COVID is the disaster that hangs over us the longest, and that most imperiled our economy and our health. For 2 years, we have been isolated. Our children, for a long time, didn't go to school. Those that were able didn't go to work. Businesses closed, some permanently. Our friends and family got sick all around us, some of them dying. And we had to spend so much time and resources fighting to keep our communities safe. We fought the governor in court for the right to protect ourselves. And sometimes, it's got to be said, we fought each other over how to manage the danger and how to cope with the trauma. But we endured. Even with everything else going on, we had a job to do, and we did it. You know, some things only become clear after the fact, and some truths can only be seen in the numbers. We lost people in Austin to COVID, each of whom was a person, each of whom was somebody important to somebody else. It neither disrespects nor diminishes our grief to say that in the midst of that tragedy, Austinites did something that was truly remarkable. The rate at which Austinites died of COVID was half of that in the state as a whole. We masked up. We washed our hands. We isolated when we needed to. We got vaccinated. We protect ourselves, and we protected each other. If the rest of the state had protected lives at the same rate we did, 45,000 Texans would still be alive today. Now, these crises could have derailed all our other efforts, sapped our focus and our will. But we didn't falter. We held fast, without wavering, to the hope that we confess, our eyes on the future we want for our city, and we made the hard and difficult decisions to get there. Because this is the Austin way. If we retreat from the progress that we have made, or if we don't confront and own our most serious challenges, if we nibble at problems rather than facing them head on, if we shy away from the cost and conflict and disruption that attend anything important enough to be worth being done, then we imperil the future that we seek. For the sake of that future, we've got to fix the land development code to unlock the needed housing supply. We must reinvent the development process so that building in Austin no longer costs too much and takes too long. And if our only choice is to add to the cost to make it faster, or to cut costs, but then it becomes slower, then we're doing something fundamentally wrong, and we need an entirely new and different way. We need to realize the South Central waterfront, the Palm School District, the Colony Park neighborhood, and the expanded convention center. You know, in this city, we should enact tuition-free community college in service of enabling every Austinite to earn a living wage. And while we're at it, in this city, we should have free and universal child care, making it an historic commitment to the competitiveness of our city and the well-being of our families. We must do what is necessary for Austin, San Antonio to be the next great U.S. metroplex. Now, true, these are big plans, big goals. The kind of plans that would shape the future of the city and everyone who lives in it. Some would be disruptive, and all of them would be hard. But none of them are bigger. None of them require harder decisions. None of them are more disruptive than what we have already done together these last 8 years. Austin is a city that can make big plans, that inspire us, that move our blood. But this is a choice that cities make. If the last 8 years are remembered for anything, let it be that we confronted our biggest challenges head on, without reservation, that we met big problems with big solutions, that we made hard decisions, that we weren't afraid of disruption, and we paid the necessary price in focus and spirit and political capital. We do these things so that our children and grandchildren can inherit a great city with its spirit and its soul intact. I would ask you to remember this in the days ahead. Some of which ask you to believe things that aren't, back up, because there are forces abroad. I want you to remember these things in days ahead, excuse me. Because there are forces abroad in our politics that will ask you to forget what we did and why we did it. Extremism, distrust, and misinformation, some of which ask you to believe things that are not true, and all of which ask you ultimately not to believe. To trivialize the idea that we are even capable of making big plans and hard decisions, to forget all that we have accomplished together, and to dismiss as nonsense what we know as truth, that we are a living community, bonded by common dreams and graced with a shared destiny. If we hold fast to the belief in ourselves, confident that there is no challenge bigger than our imagination, no decision harder than our resolve. If we believe in Austin and each other, we will pass through all of the turmoils we may face and deliver for future generations the city that they deserve. Being mayor of this magical place, the third longest serving mayor in the history of the city, by the way, has been an honor beyond description. I love this city and I always will. And while there's more work to be done, I still need, and while there's more work that I still need to get done, in January, I will leave this office with a glad heart. Because I believe that today's Austin is a little bit more just and a little bit more prepared than the city that we inherited. And the city that we leave to our children and grandchildren is one that they will be proud to call home. We have done this together in the short time that we have been its trustees. I am grateful for the wisdom and kindness and support that you have shared with me these 8 years. And I am humbled by the courage and the grit and the grace and the love that Austinites show for their city and for each other. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Austin. Thank you so much.